So I think it's just noon now, so maybe we'll just wait a minute, let see if a few more folks are joining, and then we'll get started. Good evening, or hello from Austin, from North Wales in the UK, Los Altos, Sonoma County, great. Lots of locations. Well, should we go ahead and get started? Colin, usually you get the first word if you'd like, or
Sure. Yeah, happy to kick it off. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Design Bites. I hope everyone's having a fantastic Friday so far. It's almost the weekend. Let's go. I'm very excited to see everyone joining us today for this amazing session. For those of you who may not know, my name is Colin Summerhauser. I'm the head of Haunted House here in Palo Alto. And just as a quick background, if you're not familiar, Haunted House is a flexible co-working space and cafe. And we have locations in both Newport Beach and Palo Alto. And we're actually a subsidiary of the global software company, SAP. And we sort of serve as like SAP's community-facing initiative with this goal of kind of bringing people together to explore and exchange ideas. And we host events like Design Bites every month to engage with our community. Now, our workspace locations were closed for about 16 months due to the pandemic, but the good news is we just officially reopened about 2 months ago, and we are welcoming guests back into both our locations, so that's very exciting. And what's cool about Haunted House is our workspace is open to anyone that wants to use it. We actually have no membership costs, no long-term commitment whatsoever. Instead, we offer pay-by-the-hour workspace reservations. So it's super flexible, super versatile, and it really can be used on an as-needed basis, which is very unique in the co-working world. We also have our partner Blue Bottle Coffee inside our building, serving delicious craft coffee and small eats. So if you are local to the Bay Area or to Newport Beach and want to stop by, you can feel free to head to our website. It's hauntedhouse.com to see all our seating options, our prices, and really hope to see you sometime in the future. Now today, I do encourage you all to use the chat feature at the bottom to engage and ask questions, make this super interactive. And as a quick starter, maybe we can have everyone go to the chat box right now and just comment where you're tuning in from. I see some people have already started to do that, but it's always fun to see where our audience is coming from in the world. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the Haunted House YouTube channel and sent out via email after this is over within about the next week or so. We'll also provide a little survey at the end just to see how we can improve our session. So please fill that out if you do get a chance. And with that, maybe I'll hand it back over to Dan to kind of kick off the session today.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. And just looking from our backgrounds, no, we aren't actually seated right next to each other, but that is the Haunted House in the background. But we're actually in different locations today. Yeah, so Design Bites is something I've been teaching almost for 4 years now, actually, and it started as an in-person event where we would meet at the Haunted House and we would talk about design topics, and we would do some exercises interactively. Sometimes we would build something, and it's been exciting that we've been able to continue the discussion and design topics virtually, which we've been doing this past year. And we certainly hope that we can come back soon in person eventually and do something that way again also. So I wanted to just start today by introducing our two special guests. Well, so first of all, let me just say, most of you, I'd like to think you know me, but actually, if you don't, I'm a designer at SAP. I'm also a researcher, been working in the UX field for a long time. And so I've had a chance to work on everything in my career from furniture and toys to mobile devices and now business software applications, which is what I'm doing now at SAP. And then, as I was mentioning about the HANA House, Design Bites is something I like to sort of run and do in my spare time or free time, however you may have it. And today we have two special guests. They're actually both members we're all members of the same team. So it's great that I can bring them here, and we already are quite familiar with each other, but I'd like to give them each a chance to introduce themselves to you. Ellie, maybe you could start by introducing yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Dan. I'm Ellie Kemery, and I'm a principal researcher at SAP, specifically within SAP Design. We are part of a user insights team. And this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, so I cannot wait to get this discussion going. I've been a design researcher my whole career, so decades. I'm not going to go into how many. And in a variety of industries and at different scales. But this is something that this topic has been a theme of mine for, gosh, about 15 years now. So really eager to, like I said, jump into conversation about it. So Nisha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Nisha. Also a UX researcher with Dan and Ellie at SAP, and sort of newer to this topic, but really excited about it. And we've been having a lot of great conversations about inclusive design at work. So really excited to hear everyone else's perspective as well.
Great. And so just a few sort of maybe housekeeping notes before we dive in. So one, no pressure at all, but if you'd like to turn on your cameras, we'd love to see you. And that's kind of one way we interact. We're going to we'll show some slides, but we're also going to be doing a good bit of this session just with the three of us talking back and forth. So you're welcome to come on camera at some point if you feel like it. No pressure there. Next, the other thing I'm just going to mention is that the way we sort of set up the session today is we hope you'll feel a little bit like it's the three of us sitting around, drinking coffee and just talking about design. And we want you to feel free to also participate, ask questions, join the conversation. That would be great. All right, so I wanted to then just probe a little bit and ask maybe Ellie, Misha, maybe you could share something about inclusive design is really it's a new topic. It's a new field. How did each of you get exposed to it, maybe, and interested? What brought you to the point where you're now actively working and participating in this field?
Yeah, I could dive in. So I've always been really concerned about making sure that people who are not typically represented, their voices come to life, for teams as we're building and creating experiences or products. But specifically, I became really passionate about this at the time of, I think, when the iPhone first came out, and I was doing some work and just realizing how many people were not able to really, experience that fully, right? And so it really got me concerned that there was entire populations of people that were literally being excluded from one of, a huge technological advantage or advancement. And so I started learning more about, products that were out there and this topic of inclusive design. And I really just rolled up my sleeves and jumped right in and started, learning everything I could from people who come from these different communities, like maybe they're, non-sighted users or people who have, mobility differences, and learning from them directly about their experiences with these new emerging technologies. And And then I started getting involved in helping others understand the need to think about them in the process of their work. And so, yeah, and that was quite a long time ago, actually, about, like I said, when the iPhone was first introduced. Nisha, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it was a lot newer of a journey. And so earlier this year, I actually had a chance at SAP to participate in a program called Pro Bono for Economic Equity. And so I got a chance to partner with another company or startup that was working on an educational application for children, and really helping them with some design and research. And it was a really great experience, but also really opened my eyes to the way that design and research has to be approached in different ways for different communities and different classroom settings and different demographics. So it got me sort of interested in this area of inclusive design. And then when Ellie joined our team as well, I think we both found similar passions in that. And yeah.
Awesome, great. So thanks. And so somewhat similarly, I actually did some design work a few years ago where we were taking into account different outdoor conditions and lighting conditions for mobile devices. And I didn't realize at the time I was actually working on an inclusive design problem. I didn't realize that, but then I would say just in the last couple of years, I, through a colleague at work, I became interested in the topic, and I read a really great book, and we're gonna take a look at a few points from the book in just a moment. But the author was, her name is Kat Holmes, and she's a researcher at Google. The title of the book is Mismatch. And I just sort of really loved the title and loved some of the ideas that were presented there. All right, so I'm going to actually now switch into a little bit of our presentation deck now. And so give me a moment. Let me just share my screen and we can take a look at the next little section of our presentation. All right. Just 1 second here. All right, great. So let me just okay, let me just move to the right screen. So, okay, 1 second. Oh, okay, here we are. So, yeah, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about this book that I had read, Mismatches. As I mentioned, it's written by Kat Holmes. And I just really sort of loved some of the points that she made in the book. So she basically said that, you know, a few things. A mismatch is something that you know, is a barrier. It presents itself as a barrier to keeping people from interacting perhaps in the way they would want to. And it is mismatches are something that you know, make things less accessible for some people than others, right? And the way she sort of phrased this was this idea of mismatches are the building blocks of exclusion, which I thought was a really interesting term. And I really sort of liked the way she explained that, and how that, you know, that's something that you can really imagine. So I'm going to ask that, here, let me just go to the next slide. So we've got a few, so this is going to be a little interactive. I've got a few visual examples, and we want you to just put into the chat, or feel free to just speak out. But we want you to describe what is the mismatch that you see in the following images that I show you. All right, so let's take a look at one. Does anybody see a mismatch here? What might that be? And I see a comment from Alex. We do not understand the language. And from Carrie 19DC. Yeah, exactly. So I'm looking at some food that looks quite delicious, but I'm not sure the currency. I don't understand the price. And I certainly, at least with my language skills, I don't understand the description of the food items. So, while I can still see and perhaps interact with what's here, there are barriers that prevent me from fully understanding and having the optimal experience I have with these items. Great. All right. So let's go on to the next one. And this one, we're actually sort of telling you what the issue is, but perhaps this is something we've all experienced or at one time in our life, maybe when we were much younger. But imagine going to the amusement park and you really want to go on a ride, but you find out that instead you're actually not tall enough to or large enough to get on and actually go on that particular amusement park ride. And I think someone might be unmuted, so if you are unmuted, maybe mute yourself, help us with the recording quality. That would be great, super. And feel free to unmute if you've got something that you want to add or say. Okay, perfect. So I'll just keep moving here. All right, how about this example? Anyone have any feedback? So here we're looking at, you can sort of see there's a little house and a neighborhood. Someone says not wheelchair friendly. Alex, thanks. Yeah, definitely not. But here in this example, a highway has been built sort of right through the middle of this neighborhood. And what that does is, at least in the example is intended to show that here now because of this highway that's now here, it's much harder to interact in a nice way with your neighbors or to walk freely through the neighborhood with this highway running right through it. And yes, it's definitely a noisy place to live. I totally agree. All right, how about this last one? So this image really kind of hits home to me because you have a person that is there. They've got a wheelchair motorized device, and there's a hiking path or path, but the path actually isn't accessible to this person. So here I think is just sort of a really key example of where there's a path has been built, there's an opportunity for recreation, but it's just not accessible in an easy way for quite a number of people. And that for us, demonstrates, I think, both the problem and the opportunity. So as you can see, and I really sort of love this image, but we have this idea of, and I hope I can really drive this home, is that mismatches really are these building blocks of exclusion. They can be completely unintentional, yet when a mismatch occurs, that's when there are these opportunities for exclusion to take place. I have another example, and here, well, what do you think of this? I'm really curious. This is actually kind of a famous site. It's called Robson Square Steps. It's located in Vancouver, and it was built in the early 1970s. Has anybody seen it, or maybe you've seen this photograph before? Yeah, and there's actually a story behind it. The path is not actually wheelchair accessible, but it should be, or it looks like it could be. And so I think the idea I was trying to represent here is that in this design, the architect actually built in a way, and we have to also remember this was in the 70s, but the attempt was made to build in more than one way to access or navigate this stairway. And I think so from that idea, it's kind of a nice example of when we think of inclusive design, what are we talking about? And one thing that I always think about is just simply providing multiple pathways or multiple ways to access the same content or the same things. All right, great. So I want to now just say we've talked a little bit about mismatches and exclusion, but what about what is inclusion? So I'm quite curious. Anyone have a definition for me on what you think this term might mean? I have a few which I'll share in a moment, but just curious what some folks might think about this. Any ideas? So I'll just start to add these, right? Anyone who wants to use something can. Yeah, I love that, and that's a lot less formal than the bullet point I have, and I think it really is a great way to think about what we mean by the term inclusion. But it's giving access being fair and equal, right? It's being taken in as part of a whole. It also represents a few other things. Typically, we think of when the word inclusion is mentioned, we think about the idea of perhaps accommodating people that have historically not been accommodated or excluded, right? And so oftentimes we think of it both as definitely this first definition, being taken in as part of the whole. And also, I think the second bullet point, I think for me, represents really the opportunity that's here, which is to include people that have historically perhaps not been. Another definition is this idea that in education specifically, where we can actually try to include students that maybe typically were not included. There's an opportunity to actually bring people together. And so quite often you'll hear inclusion floated around in one of these situations. Anybody have any other examples maybe or ideas that they would also throw out as definitions? I see one saying there's the going to the dance, but there's being asked to dance. Yeah, exactly. Right. I think that's a great idea. And Rob is saying, I'd be interested to know what is the cost of inclusion? Yeah, that's an interesting question. We'll touch on that a little bit later in some of when we talk a little bit about business practices. But there's various ways to think about the cost, and the cost, I would say, well, it will mean different things to different people. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and going to come back to the main group. But now I want to post the question: what does inclusive design mean to you? So we've talked a little bit about the definition of inclusion. But now I want to focus on the idea of inclusive design. Probably in some way that's why we're all here today. So let's pause the slides and let's talk again together. So what do we think? What do we think about that question? And I'm just going to put it back into the chat. What does inclusive design mean to you? And I know everybody's dying to give me an answer right away, but so I'm going to just sort of turn to our experts and this is something we've been talking about on and off anyway. So I'll pose it to Nisha and Ellie. What does inclusive design perhaps mean to you?
Yeah, I think to me, it really means having a broad spectrum of different ages, diversity, different abilities, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and really designing a sort of unified experience or something that's comfortable for everyone to use.
Yeah, to build on what Nisha just said, I think inclusive design means that you're including all types of folks in the product development process. You're thinking about them as you're coming up with these ideas and new experiences, and you're really trying to account for those needs. And like you mentioned earlier, Dan, it requires a level of, flexibility, right? And openness to customization and to how people expect to use these new experiences. But I think about it as, just really intentionally trying to involve people from different cultural backgrounds, people with different abilities, people who really truly represent the kinds of folks that will be using these experiences or these designs or products or what services, whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah, great. And so I see some great comments in the chat. So Kim, Teddy, Carrie, anyone who care to expand on your comments? I love Teddy, your comment about your work in homelessness and people being equally able to be reached and understand what's available, right? That's a great goal. Kim, you should mentioning designing for everyone, regardless of ability, race, culture. Absolutely. Any other thoughts around what inclusive design might mean? And Kim, you're bringing up this term universal design, right? And so so there's various sort of terms and terminology around some of this, and universal design and inclusive design are very closely related terms. I would say one area where I think inclusive design sort of stakes a claim for being different from universal design is where we're typically talking about software, and probably again a more typical example of universal design is architecture, and so that's a generalized distinction, but that's one example. Any other?
Yeah, I'll just add to that by saying universal design also thinks about the extremes. Yeah. And focusing on the extremes is a way to really meet the needs of all. Whereas I think inclusive design is a little bit more, around understanding all the differences and trying to ensure that the things that we're creating meet the needs of all types of people. So it's a little bit, in some ways, it's a little bit more like one step beyond, I guess, what I would consider universal design in that regard.
Any other thoughts or questions about that? Agree, disagree? This is all, the great thing about this field is it's new. So we're sort of making some of this up as we go. But yeah, I completely agree with Elliot as far as how I would define that. Any other thoughts? I see one from Rob. So is inclusive design more AI oriented? It could be. Right. I mean, that depends. That depends on perhaps how the technology might be used to include more people. I'm just sort of generally reacting to that question. I think it definitely is perhaps a factor. So Alex is saying inclusive design should be intuitive. You should not have to work out how to use something. Yeah, so I love that, and that's actually when we started with the question, what does inclusive design mean to you? I think immediately following that up is then what is perhaps or what are perhaps some of the mindsets that are important that we express as as inclusive designers or researchers, people working in a sphere where inclusion is really important. Any thoughts or comments about that? I'm going to sort of look at Nisha and Ellie a little bit about some ideas around these mindsets. I know we also have wanted to talk a little bit about some of the principles behind inclusive design, but you know, where do we, I guess where I always sort of, you know, it's one thing to define a term, but then, you know, I love this idea of, you know, I have a definition, but what are the mindsets maybe that I have, or how do I approach thinking about inclusivity in the work that I do?
Yeah, I think one way is really just involving a lot of people of different voices to be heard at the table upfront and early on in the design process and in the product lifecycle. So really just hearing various perspectives and allowing everyone to be heard.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to the mindset, you have, you know, it really does require a level of openness. And it requires, you know, intention, I would say, like, you know, being intentional about trying to understand and, you know, get beyond what you know and start to really actively involve people so that you can learn with them about their experiences. I mean, we can never, like, none of us can ever know what it's like to walk in those shoes exactly. But there is this ability to you know, have some sort of a collaboration in a way, and involve a lot of different types of people, whoever is going to wind up using these products and experiences, you know, fully representing those folks throughout the process, just so that, you know, we can learn with them as to how to best create those experiences.
Yeah, I think I love that thought, and I was there's a quote from a book called Building for Everyone, where they're talking about inclusive research, and the quote says something, I'm not going to, well, I'll try to read it, but getting proximate is the act of getting closer to someone to understand their experiences, their fears, their hopes, and the goal is to build empathy, which hopefully leads to action, right? And so as user researchers, I think when I think about empathy, that's something we've all been taught to learn and to you know, sort of manifest in our daily work. But that's really, again, key to I think approaching how we might begin to think differently about creating and designing products with this mindset. And so I think one other maybe point here to bring up is just this idea that, you know, well, it's great that we're thinking about it, but when would we maybe bring this into the product design process, or how, you know, how should we, I mean, where do we start? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts. I know Nisha does too, but I think from the very beginning, right? Like from the time an initiative kicks off, from the very earliest possible stage. In fact, it's even, you know, better to go and just do this work before there is even a project, right? Like where you're trying to understand, you know, the needs and expectations of all types of different people, right? And so, but early and often, and I would say all throughout. And when it comes to, you know, inclusion, I just gave a talk on this recently, but it's one thing to involve people with, you know, these differences in our research and in our process. And it's also important that, you know, we are inclusive about the teams we're involving throughout the process. And that is so that they can also learn with these different people and understand, you know, how to take action on it. Right. And so and that they do take action on it, right? So that's the other thing, that the only way to ensure that these, these learnings that we're having, this insight that's being generated and whatnot is going to actually improve experiences is to go about it in that way. So
Great. I love that answer. So I'm looking in the chat, and Tash has said, I think looking at what shortfalls in inclusivity exist in current designs can help you to think inclusively when making your own designs. And I think that's a really good point. And I think that also kind of leads us really nicely into, I think the next area we wanted to touch on, which are just simply, I want to approach a project from an inclusive perspective. What are some principles of inclusive design that come to mind that, someone should be following, thinking about, and doing as they work on a design project? Any thoughts there?
I can start by saying that I think that there's so many different types of principles and different organizations trying to come up with different principles. So just to name, just a couple, one might be to offer choice when you're designing. So really allowing users or end users to have multiple choices and ways to navigate through something. And really allow them to have the freedom. And another one is having like consistency throughout products. So that it's not, relearning and it's not, so there's some level of consistency to help allow focus. And Ellie, I'm sure you have more as well.
yeah, I mean,
there's so many.
yeah, there are, like Nisha said, there's tons of institutions. I'm actually personally contributing to the Equity Army, which is also defining principles around these things. But I think what you were saying about offering choice and giving control actually to the people who are using the product so they can really make it fit their needs is another way to think about it. Certainly the consistency, but also, yeah, just flexibility, right? And actually, as people who are working on the product experiences, understanding all the different contexts, right? That this thing is going to be, that this, whatever you're working on is going to be utilized, and making sure that you're considering all those different contexts and different use cases as well.
Yeah, so another one that came to my mind is considering the situation. So as I mentioned, previously, I worked on a project where we were creating mobile devices for people in the field. So they would often be in, warm temperatures, cold temperatures. Sometimes they were wearing gloves, and all of those kinds of situations are the various contexts. Need to be considered when you work on the design, and that also plays right into this idea of providing multiple pathways for a user to accomplish the same thing, offering choice. And I think a couple other principles that I'm aware of. One I was thinking of is sort of prioritizing content. So here we might want to say where we might prioritize the most essential content in a way that is the most accessible, making the most used content the most accessible. That's something that you can get to from a design perspective. You can learn from a research side. What are the most most commonly used aspects of my product or my site, and those are that's the content that you want to then prioritize and build perhaps multiple pathways to access those things. And just bringing that up when we're talking about products and the ability to perhaps access the content, I wanted to just sort of touch on a little bit now what are perhaps some differences when we talk about inclusive design, but almost always the word accessibility gets brought in to that conversation. And what are some of the differences and perhaps similarities where we would maybe where we come together? I'm really sort of curious how just how we would think about accessibility maybe versus inclusive design as a starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a really important topic, and one that is often, they're kind of used in similar or exchanged, like people use them for like interchange them, I guess. But there are some real differences. So, oftentimes when we think at least of accessibility, we're really thinking of WCAG, and we're thinking of, how to ensure that people can just access these experiences and tech, in a lot of cases, it's, can they technically accomplish what they need to do in this tool, or, are these things meeting WCAG standards, which is a universally recognized standardization of compliance around accessibility, making sure that, people can technically use these things that we're creating. But really the difference is inclusive design is looking for more than that, right? It's looking to actually make sure that these experiences that we are creating are great experiences for all people that are using it. So for me, there is a real difference. Something can be technically compliant, but it doesn't mean it's a good user experience. So
yeah, I mean, I think, going back to my background and work, we would often create a product or specific controls or components in a product, and the last thing we would do would be to try to, I would say, retrofit or somehow make it past the accessibility standards and requirements, right? And that's sort of the old way of thinking. And now, I mean, we can even, the three of us, point to current work we're doing where accessibility is one of the key aspects of the new designs that we're working on, and we're looking, definitely even past sort of being compliant to the standards, but we're trying to sort of begin to now chart a new path, where we go beyond the standards and say, but what about the experience? Is it for various differently abled people, are they actually having a great user experience, even though we say it's compliant? What are we doing to make that better for them? Mm-hmm. All right, so I want to just add now into the chat one last question for you all, and it's, why is inclusive design valuable and necessary as a practice in today's workplace? And it's hopefully that's something you would, that's a statement that I hope you would agree with. It's certainly something the three of us agree with. We're actually actively involved in making that happen, I think, within our company, and it's certainly recognized that's a valuable thing to be doing. But why? I'm curious, what reasons do you think is this now something that is seen as valuable and necessary, where maybe even a few years ago, perhaps it was not? Any thoughts there? I see some things coming into the chat. Yeah. So Tash is saying, because everyone deserves a good experience. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Everyone deserves a good user experience. And I think that's I would love to just sort of tape that up on my wall. I think that's exactly what we, the goal we shoot for. Great. So I see some other comments. Should allow all workplace members to participate. Yeah, great. Any other reasons as to why? So one reason I would add is that companies are increasingly realizing that it's valuable to them to provide this access, because it's at first maybe you might think that they might consider a differentiator, but it's becoming standard practice where this is companies should be providing this kind of inclusive experience for all users, and it's really good business. Because if you think about it, some of these various factors actually will occur for everyone at some point or another in their life experience, right? I mean, I drop my glasses, or I leave them at home, and suddenly I have trouble with vision, whereas perhaps I didn't before. Or I have an accident, and for a few weeks I can't use my hand the way perhaps I'm used to using it. So these things happen, and I think companies are increasingly realizing that this is definitely a market that they have to address and need to address. Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, what you just said about situational, or the fact that, you know, every one of us at some point or another is going to experience, you know, a difference of some kind, you know, and that used to be, I think, and this is not so long ago even, a common thing I would hear is it how many people are really impacted by these things, like what percentage of our users, you know. But it actually is important to bring up that really all of us, right, are excluded at some point or another based on whatever it is that we're experiencing. And, you know, like the examples shown earlier, like if we're in a place where we can't understand the language, or, you know, I mean, there's a variety of situations like that. So so it really is, because it's about creating great experiences for everyone, and it does lead to business value in the way of, you know, could be market share. It could still be a positioning strategy, because I'm sure many of the folks on the call today also know this, that there's not a lot of great user experiences out there for people with these differences that we're trying to account for. These are truly underserved communities. So it can be a differentiator in that regard.
Cool. So now I'm going to actually go back to the slides, and we want to just talk about and show you a few examples where perhaps companies should have thought more about including people and they didn't, and what are some of the implications of that. So let me just go back and share my screen quickly. All right. Great. So let me just okay. So
Great. Yeah, I think it was mentioned in the chat that it's important to sort of look at some of the shortfalls of where inclusion hasn't been taken into account. And so we just thought we'd share a few examples of when this has happened, and feel free to add in the chat if you have similar experiences or examples or anything else that you've heard about. And the first one was actually pretty recently due to the pandemic, Britain. They had an exam, and they decided to take the exam scores derive them from an algorithm. And many say that gave disadvantaged students an unfair scoring. So the algorithm used a variety of data factors, but 40% of the grades were downgraded from teacher predicted grades. And they found that it was actually public schools took a larger hit than private schools. So that was just one example that stood out pretty recently.
not good.
Yep. And then another example is with facial recognition, which I know many of us use with our phones these days. But face recognition technologies have been shown to have high rates of error with people of color, and this has been a problem with particularly with police departments misidentifying or mislabeling people, and you know, getting the wrong people for the wrong crimes. And I think that's been a big problem with the error rates.
Yeah, here's another one.
Yeah. And similarly, also with skin color, it was actually at a Marriott hotel in Atlanta, but also has been at several other places where soap dispensers have been shown to not recognize certain skin tones. So, so that's definitely problematic for sure. And this one, in just March of 2019, there were 2 female astronauts, Anne McLean and Christina Koch, and they were going to be part of the first all-female spacewalk, but NASA had to actually cancel the mission because they only had one spacesuit that would fit a woman's body type. And the original NASA spacesuit was designed more for men's body types and structures. So starting in the 1970s, NASA provided different spacesuit sizes, but they didn't really take into account that the body structure was a little different. And so it wasn't something that could just be solved by making it larger or smaller, but really had to be tailored to a slightly different fit. And along those lines, studies found recently that female drivers or front seat passengers were 17% more likely to be killed in a car crash and 73% more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash than their male counterparts. And while manufacturers, test with a variety of dummy sizes, they don't really take into account the physiological makeup of men and women and test with these differences in mind. So things like airbags, seatbelts, all of these sort of impact that. Does anyone else have any examples or similar stories to share?
I see Tanya has written products should not cause damage, such as Facebook. So, and I think there's definitely some point of truth to that. So great comments. I'm just going to post this last question to all of you, and then I'll stop sharing and come back to the group view. But we've shared some ideas about how inclusive design should be, the mindsets, what are some of the principles. But I think we're really curious to put this back to the group. What can you do? What are some ways that you can imagine approaching your work in a more inclusive way? And I think if we have time, we have a little follow-up about what are some things we're currently doing at SAP, but I think really, we're all super interested to know what are some ways or aspects that you can see where you would be able to approach work in a more inclusive way. So let me just stop sharing here and come back to the group. Yeah, so I'd love to open that up to just some final points of discussion. Any thoughts there? Anyone? And maybe I can start with our own team, because this is definitely something we're actively working in this field. Definitely, we work in a company that's has a lot of different motivators or reasons why we do things a certain way. What are some ways that we could approach this? And let me just.
I really love what you said, Alex, in the chat. Being that you're a student in design, because I'm a big believer of the same. Making these practices around inclusive design being the norm, not the exception. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, right. I think it's a part of it certainly is, why aren't we starting with this at the starting point, rather than, as I said, earlier in my career, we would maybe be addressing some of these issues almost at the very end of the product life cycle.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, thinking empathetically. you had mentioned, like, how are we doing it at SAP? And I just want to point out that that we really do all play a role in this, regardless of whether you work in design and product, or if you work in marketing, or whatever your role in the world. I mean, I think there's things that you could do to approach your work more inclusively. And it could even be like the types of people you hire, right, for your teams, right? Because that makes a difference, in terms of the outcomes. But yeah, if we want to talk about what we're doing, we're being very intentional. And this is like, Dan was mentioning, it's great that we're doing this, but I wish it would have happened, earlier. But we are standing up. We now have a head of, inclusive design, and there's an entire organization being built around that. But I actually personally am helping to establish a practice of inclusive research across all of SAP, which, will hopefully, make it easier for researchers to be doing, inclusive research as a norm and not an exception, just part of their everyday, work. And so, yeah, Nisha, do you have anything to add regarding what we're doing?
Yeah, I think definitely involving more diversity in the research process is huge, and I think having that from the early stages, and really involving different varieties of participants and talking to different end users right from the get-go. I think that's huge.
I'm seeing some really interesting comments in the chat. So I've seen from Carrie, hire people with the lived experience to do the work. So yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
right. I mean, we can't sometimes solve problems that we don't know about, or that we don't live ourselves. So that's a really super super suggestion. And Dora is saying, good reminder that we can design a product that's more inclusive, and to be more considerate of people, right, with of differing abilities. Absolutely, yeah. We really don't have time, but I was gonna show a slide, but I'll just explain it. But basically, one thing we're doing at SAP as an organization is we have a central design team, and the focus of the team used to be sort of 3 pillars, which would be design and research, and what I like to call operations. But we now have a 4th pillar, which is inclusive design. And so now as just even, when you express that and look at that on paper, it's a big step that we've taken. And we're excited to be part of that journey. And we hope we can bring some more of what we're learning and doing to some of these future sessions. Any comments from anybody? I see we're just about out of time. So love to hear, I'd love to hear from a few of you if you have any final thoughts or comments to share. And everyone's quiet, but I see things going on in the chat. So let me see if I can pull a few of those out. Teddy is saying, yes, HUD is all over the inclusion of lived experience. But the political structure doesn't play well. Yeah, so, this is an emerging field like anything else. And, political aspects come into play, financial aspects come into play. But again, we feel like the focus on this is only growing, and we look forward to being part of that journey together.
I think that's a really good point too, because it's important to acknowledge the barriers, the things that make this hard, right? So that we can start to, problem solve around those things, because we can't let them get in the way of of this change that needs to happen, right? So, but in recognizing that it's not just something that's that easy necessarily, but it is like Dan was saying, such a new field that it is going to take all of us, right, to move these things forward. So
thank you, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's going to take all of us, and really, this is something we can be thinking about and apply to what we do every day. Colin, we're just going to now turn it back over to you. I think we're at the end of our time and our session today. So,
yep. Thanks, Dan, and thank you, Nisha and Ellie as well. And thank you to all of our participants for taking the time out of your day to join us for this session. I think this was such an insightful conversation. I think based on, the engagement and the questions we had, this was an incredibly valuable session for everyone who tuned in. I will be dropping the feedback survey in here as well, so you guys can take a look at that. And if you do have a chance, please fill it out. It's really helpful for us to figure out how to make these sessions better in the future. And next year, we are considering sort of a hybrid model for Design Bites, where we maybe have some virtual events for our remote audience, and then maybe some smaller in-person events at Haunted House again. So be on the lookout for some communications in the near future on that. And with that, have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.